What's going on, guys? Kyle here, and today on episode 4 of the podcast, we're going to be talking about RCRA, DOT, and chemical management. So these are all topics that I believe a lot of workplaces struggle with. I think a lot of workplaces, especially ones that we've been to in the past, I think that they've had a lot of problems in this area. So we're going to be hitting on a couple different things that you can do to help in the workplace, manage it better, and what you can do to be better prepared. So first I'm going to start off, my guest today, once again, is Hallie Koenig. If you didn't watch the episode last time, Hallie has a very significant career in EHS. She's been doing EHS for over 10 years, has a master's degree in safety. She is a CSP. So she joins us today, and we're going to be talking together about RCRA DOT. So Hallie, what have you seen in the workplace personally in regards to compliance and RCRA DOT?
So I'd probably echo what you're saying, where it seems like it's a topic that touches a lot of different facilities, a lot of different workplaces, but there's a lot of gaps, I think, in our industry when it comes to RCRA and DOT, specifically on the knowledge and the training side. Again, anybody who generates waste is under that umbrella of RCRA DOT, and a lot of people don't even know training is actually required for that. So when you talk about RCRA really is more focused on the management of the waste. So the generation of the waste, the storage of the waste, and the disposal of the waste. Whereas DOT gets more into how are you managing the transportation of that waste? How do you make sure it's being handled properly, tracked properly? So from my background, RCRA is something that I've always really put an emphasis on, because most programs do lack certain basics of RCRA. So what I've noticed a lot is typically in that training forum.
Yeah, I think with training, a lot of workplaces, they'll generate hazardous waste and a supplier will come and pick it up, or not, or somebody that manages that waste, somebody that's a hauler is going to come pick it up. They're going to have a waste manifest, and they're going to have to sign that hazardous waste manifest. And whoever signs that hazardous waste manifest is going to have training on RCRA DOT. So I think that that's one of the biggest gaps that people have. I think another huge gap is just not getting rid of their waste in a timely manner. So whether they're a small quantity generator or a large quantity generator, you have different timelines for when you can hold that hazardous waste. So depending on what your status is, and some workplaces, they don't even have a status because they've never, registered for one, which could be a violation too. I think that that's one of the other places that they struggle a lot, is that they have a ton of hazardous waste that they've just been collecting on site. And it just really opens them up for significant fines.
Yep. One of the things that I've had a lot of discussions with over the years of me working in this industry is a lot of facilities and a lot of people think that once you sign that manifest and you hand that over and your waste is hauled off site, that does not mean your responsibility stops there as well, right? So the whole purpose of RCRA is to make sure that waste is managed from cradle to grave, right? So again, that's from the inception of the generation of that waste all the way up until the point that it has been destroyed, right? So as soon as your waste hauler takes that drum of waste off site, that does not necessarily mean that, that's out of your hair, you don't have to worry about it. If something were to happen and a drum of your waste was to fall off a truck, right, they're still going to track it back to you as the facility that generated it, right? Of course, that hauler does have some responsibilities in there. They're on that chain of custody at that point. But ultimately, that waste is yours until you get that guarantee, that certificate from the landfill that it's been destroyed in one way or another.
Yeah, and that's a really good point too, is those certificates, making sure that they actually got to that final destination, whether that be an incinerator or landfill or whatever waste energy that they're taking them to, making sure that you get some kind of evidence or proof or certificate that it was disposed of is going to be really significant too, especially if you're trying to get a ISO 14001 program. They're going to check that type of stuff as well. So yeah, if you get a regulatory audit or anything, that's something that's, I guess, on the table for them to look at.
Yep,
so
and they will. That's one thing that has surprised me when I've had hazardous waste inspections from what was formerly DHEC, now DES here in South Carolina. One thing that did surprise me, right, I had all my manifests, everything that I needed lined up for all of my waste transfers, but they did ask for that certificate of disposal, which luckily I had on hand, but that's something that I never really considered as part of the regulatory tracking piece of it.
Yep. Yeah. If you're new to this field, if you're like freshly into safety, or maybe you're in facility management and you have some waste on site that you just aren't sure if it's non-hazardous or hazardous and it's been sitting around for a long time, don't sit on it too long, because those could potentially be fines, especially if you're, arbitrarily collecting a whole bunch of hazardous waste on site. And then there's other rules and regulations that go into it as well, other than just the amount of time that it can be on site. You have to do waste determinations too. So you have to make sure you do a determination, make sure what the waste is, and then you have to assign waste profiles and all of that along with it. So those are all things that you have to watch out for if you're a new site generating waste, or maybe you've stepped into a safety role and a facility is kind of messed up, and it's messed up, but you don't know necessarily what is messed up about it. That's one thing that you got to watch out for, is those accumulation times, making sure that the waste determinations have been done and documented correctly, and they have waste profiles and you have outlets and everything already set up for that.
Yep. And then, so you mentioned waste profiles, waste determination, all that's really important. Another big piece of that often gets overlooked is the reporting aspect of it, right? So part of RCRA, again, speaking for here in South Carolina where we're located, part of RCRA is to then report out on what waste you've gotten disposed of that past quarter. So here in South Carolina, we do it on a quarterly basis. Some other states do it, twice a year, maybe just annually. But in South Carolina, you do send out reports quarterly for all the hazardous waste that you've got rid of from your site. So part of that is going through your different waste streams, determining what waste codes go with it. So you're needing to detail and give descriptions of what type of waste it is, whether it's flammable, corrosive, all of that goes into these reports. And they want to know down to usually by the pound is how it's measured. How many pounds of each waste stream are you disposing of? And again, that is something in a waste inspection that they will ask you to look at, they will review. And they basically want to make sure all of your manifests line up with those quarterly reports that you're sending out.
Yep, 100%. And like I said, for those of you that are just not as familiar with it, or maybe you just don't have as much experience in this, RCRA is going to be that overarching standard, a federal requirement in this space, a federal requirement that you can look at and look at the CFR, or Code of Federal Regulations, and read through that and see what the requirements are. Obviously, there's a lot of classes out there you can take. We offer classes for some of our clients that they can take through us to learn about it. But RCRA is going to be that overarching. And then whatever your state regulatory, like what Hallie was saying, whether it's South Carolina or it's South Carolina DES, or North Carolina DEQ, or Texas, or whatever state you're in, they're going to have specific standards as well that you have to pay attention to and focus on. So that can also be really hard and challenging. Like I know I've done in the past, where you're over different states and you have to learn those specific standards for those specific states, because they're going to be different everywhere. I mean, if you go to California is going to have way different waste disposal standards. Some things in California will be considered hazardous waste, whereas if you go to another state like Nevada or something like that, they might not classify that as hazardous waste. So you have to be, cognizant of that. So what are some other things that you've noticed in the workplace that companies are having a hard time with, or maybe getting violations for?
Again, I'm going to fall back onto the training. So we talked about the training requirements for RCRA and DOT. Part of that training is to educate the person who is signing off on that manifest. So one mistake I've seen made oftentimes in facilities is, they think just anybody can sign that manifest. Yep, this is the waste you're taking, go ahead and it's out of my hair. But again, part of that responsibility of whoever is signing that manifest is that person is acknowledging not only the quantity of what's being taken off site, but the identification of what's being taken off site. You know, I've been to several facilities where you go there and they have a mystery chemical, right? They've got a big tote of a unknown chemical that's been sitting there for years in the back lot. You can't tell what it is. No one knows, you know, where it came from, who put it there. So again, those are situations where you might need to have a lab come in, sample that, figure out what the characteristics of it are. I've had a situation like that where there was, again, mystery tote. No one knew where it came from, how long it was sitting there. It looked pretty gnarly. It was brown and, you know, it looked like it had some solids in there. We ended up getting it sampled so we knew what it was, so we knew how to get rid of it the right way. It ended up being dirty water, which, you know, is really ideal, but you never know what you could be working with, right? It could be a construction site where you're dealing with a lot of different subcontractors who are bringing a lot of things on site. You know, it could be an old facility that you've taken over and you don't know what that last tenant had at the facility or what they were trying to get rid of at the facility. So it's really important that you as the generator, especially if you've been through that training and you're the one who's now going to sign this document, a manifest, which is a legal document stating that you are acknowledging what that waste is that's being taken off site, because your waste hauler is also taking a liability. And most times the waste hauler will check that they are going off of generator knowledge.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the training again, because even though specifically we're targeting people that are signing off those manifests, it's also a really good idea just to have individuals that are handling that waste also sit in on that training as well, or anyone that's going to be managing that waste, because it could just be, you know, a material handler or forklift operator, and they take a 55-gallon drum of some waste. They take it off the line after it had been sitting on a paint line or something like that, and then they go set it outside. They don't put a cap on it. It rains, goes down storm drain, and then you get a violation from that because maybe they didn't seal it correctly, maybe it's overflowing, maybe they're throwing other waste in there. So just having some training for your team that's handling that is going to be really significant, because a lot of times those violations that people are getting is a lot of times it's from people handling the waste incorrectly. So they're leaving caps off. They're not having sufficient distance in between aisleways. They're leaving it outside and there's runoff. There's other things that they could get cited for that, you know, it's a good idea that if anyone's handling that waste or dealing with it, to have training on it. And to follow up on that, you know, having hazmat training and stuff like that as well, or HAZWOPER training, is going to be significant too, because if there's an emergency or spill and you have to wait a couple hours or something for a team to show up, or a customer or client to show up to come clean that up, you know, you're going to have to manage that in-house temporarily at least. And some of those people are going to have training on chemical management and how to handle hazardous waste and hazardous chemicals.
Yeah, so another really common thing I've seen in facilities is SDS management, or safety data sheet management. There's a lot of different ways you can do it. You can manage it in the workplace. Some facilities still really like that SDS binder, physical copies of your SDS right there so employees can access it, actually flip through the pages and figure out what they need. The one caution I would give on that, the biggest one that I've seen more commonly, is it's really hard to keep those up to date, right? So safety data sheets often, very frequently, get updated by their manufacturer. So if I have a chemical from manufacturer XYZ, and they usually will mail you an updated SDS, just telling you, hey, we've made a couple changes, or we've just made a revision of your SDS. It is now your responsibility, if you're the person who manages that for your facility, it's now your responsibility to take that updated SDS and replace it with the old one that you had in that spot, right? So aside from updating the SDSs, just making sure that they're there and they're available, right? If you get a new chemical on site, that SDS has got to get in that binder. So it's very easy, especially for large facilities or facilities with a lot of employees, it's very easy to fall behind on your management and your record keeping of safety data sheets.
Yeah, if you have any chemicals on site, then you have to manage those safety data sheets. And OSHA looks at it like this. You can either have paper copies or you can have a digital copy, but it needs to be readily available to employees. And from an emergency response standpoint, if I have maybe let's say a safety data sheet book that's online and somebody gets chemicals in their eye or something like that, if EMS shows up, or maybe let's say they get chemicals on their person, if EMS shows up or medical providers show up, then they're going to want to see what that chemical is. So if you do have it online, make sure you know where it's at. Make sure you know that you can print it off pretty quickly if you need to, or if employees request it, then I mean, you're legally obligated to give them a copy of that SDS sheet because they have a right to know what chemicals they're working with in the workplace.
Yeah, so as he was saying with the digital SDSs, a lot of our clients have opted to use QR codes. You can easily make a QR code. It can be readily available to several employees at one time. And leaning back on training, as you said, it's also the employer's responsibility to make sure employees understand how to access those SDSs and understand how to read it, right? So if you're going to slab a QR code up on the wall and say, this is how you find your SDSs now, you need to make sure you're doubling down and making sure they understand how to read a QR code. Make sure they have the means to do that, right? Do they have a phone with a camera on it? And then I've always really spent a lot of time when I train for hazard communication, spent a lot of time really discussing the different sections of a safety data sheet. Because a lot of a safety data sheet is really good information for your safety person or a health provider. But when it comes to your workers who are on the shop floor looking at the safety data sheet, what are the main things they really need to know, right? They need to know what to do if there's a first aid needed involving that chemical. They need to know what the main hazards are. They need to know maybe what the composition is of it. But you know, there's other aspects that maybe aren't as important. So I've spent a lot of time in my trainings on that, going through the different topics and making sure they understand how it's layered.
Yeah, training is super important across the board, but it's also a legal requirement when it comes to GHS HazCom. And when I say GHS, if you're new to the field and you don't know what that means, it's a globally harmonized system, and then HazCom is just hazard communication. But that training is required, and it's required to be done to all employees. And if you have multiple languages, then it has to be taught in those languages for those employees. So they have to understand it. And as you were saying, if you do have a QR code, they need to know how to access it. So it wouldn't be a bad idea if you did have something like that in your workplace to go over there and show employees and just say, hey, here's how you access it there. I've seen a lot of them, different workplaces do it differently. Some of them have kiosks that they go to, and then they can just go onto a computer and search it. Some people have offline databases, some people have paper copies. It doesn't really matter as long as they can access it and it's readily available.
Yep, and another really good rule of thumb that I've always tried to practice is just talk to your employees, right? So I would walk the floor and stop by and just say, hey, are you good? Do you understand how to do everything? Do you have everything you need? I've had instances like that where employees have actually told me like, hey, the link is dead, or I can't find this safety data sheet in our inventory. So it's actually can be very eye-opening if you just talk to the team. At the end of the day, if you're doing those check-ins and you've built that trust with them, they're going to come forward and they're going to help you do your job more effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. So I hope you guys learned something new today. If you have any questions about this episode or anything that we covered, feel free to leave a comment below and we'll try to get to them as fast as we can. If you have any other questions, then you can call us or go to our website, AmericanHealthAndSafety.com, and you can send us a contact form on there. So hope you have a great day and happy holidays.